The documented history of the shroud dates back to 1354, when it was exhibited in the new collegiate church of Liry, a village in north-central France. The shroud was denounced as a forgery by the Bishop of Troyes in 1389. It was acquired by the House of Savoy in 1453 and later deposited in a chapel in Chambéry, where it was damaged by fire in 1532. In 1578, the Savoys moved the shroud to their new capital in Turin, where it has remained ever since. The shroud is rectangular, measuring approximately 4.4 by 1.1 meters, 14 feet 5 in times 3 feet 7 in. The cloth is woven in a 3-to-1 herringbone twill composed of flax fibrils. Its most distinctive characteristic is the faint, brownish image of a front and back view of a naked man with his hands folded across his groin. The two views are aligned along the midplane of the body and point in opposite directions. The front and back views of the head nearly meet at the middle of the cloth. The image in faint straw yellow color on the crown of the cloth fibers appears to be of a man with a beard, mustache, and shoulder-length hair parted in the middle. He is muscular and tall. Various experts have measured him as from 1.70 to 1.88 meters or 5 feet 7 in to 6 feet 2 in. Reddish-brown stains are found on the cloth, correlating with the wounds in the biblical description of the crucifixion of Jesus. The shroud was damaged in a fire in 1532 in the chapel in Chambéry, France. There are some burn holes and scorched areas down both sides of the linen, caused by contact with molten silver during the fire that burned through it in places while it was folded. 14 large triangular patches and 8 smaller ones were sewn onto the cloth by Poor Clare nuns to repair the damage. There are no definite historical records concerning the particular shroud currently at Turin Cathedral prior to the 14th century. Historical records seem to indicate that a shroud bearing the image of a crucified man appeared in the village of Liry, in north-central France, around the years 1353 to 1357. History of the shroud from the 15th century is well recorded. In 1453, Margaret de Charny deeded the shroud to the House of Savoy. In 1532, the shroud suffered damage from a fire in a chapel of Chambéry, capital of the Savoy region, where it was stored. A drop of molten silver from the reliquary produced a symmetrically placed mark through the layers of the folded cloth. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke state that Joseph of Arimathea wrapped the body of Jesus in a piece of linen cloth and placed it in a new tomb. The Gospel of John says he used strips of linen. After the resurrection, the Gospel of John states, Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus's head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. The Gospel of Luke states, Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves. Bodies were buried in strips of linen in Egypt. But how is that possible? The shroud has undergone several restorations and several steps have been taken to preserve it to avoid further damage and contamination. It is kept under laminated bulletproof glass in an airtight case. The temperature and humidity controlled case is filled with argon, 99.5%, and oxygen, 0.5%, to prevent chemical changes. The shroud itself is kept on an aluminum support sliding on runners and stored flat within the case. Since the discovery of the Shroud of Turin, there have been endless disputes about its authenticity. Some of the experiments and research have been bizarre, some humorous. But to this day no one can say for sure whether the shroud is genuine. We will now show you what the canvas is really hiding. But to all the deep believers, I want to say, Jesus exists and faith in him is the right way. Only the historical interpretations have been greatly altered. The canvas is and is not real. It is not genuine in the sense of historical interpretation, but it is genuine in the image that emanates from it. We're looking at two paintings. The image on the left is the negative, but the image on the right is the positive. It's a real scene that took place in a dark room. We'll get to that moment later. Notice the overexposed areas. Some scientists say this was not caused by burning, but by long-term storage of the folded canvas in moisture. Is that silly? Yes. Science doesn't use common sense. Let's look at the details. Notice that these overexposed areas are connected by a straight line, which I have highlighted in purple. Science claims that the canvas burned in a church fire. But we'll show that this canvas never saw any fire in a church. Now let's go through the detail again, and this time notice the yellow highlighted lines. Can you guess what they are? We'll stop here for a moment. I added one perpendicular purple line, which is also important. Something strange also appears along it. You still can't think of anything? Okay. Let's take another look and highlight some more light lines that look a bit chaotic. I've highlighted them again with bright yellow. Okay, I'm not gonna bother you anymore and make you tense. What do you say to this? Yes, these are the so-called Baghdad clay batteries. But there is something else. Let's look again. Scientists considered these prints to be blood dripping from hands. In reality, the man has a chain wrapped around his body. He holds its ends in his hands. This is how the whole picture looks like. We will break down the individual parts and talk about them. Let's see how exactly the shape of the battery fits with the overexposed area. The canvas was burned by the heat in the places where the batteries were. The batteries were connected by an iron rod running through them. This is how we also connect batteries plus and minus today. We can see that in the shoulder area the closures point up. But at the bottom of the legs they point to the ground. Around these batteries, and from the iron bars on which they were mounted, electric discharges shot out and very likely injured the man standing in the middle. This is clearly visible on her back, which many believe she was flogged. But let's look above the man's head. Between the front and the back of the head, where the crown is, we see a certain gap. It's like there's a part missing. The canvas was hung over an iron structure. At the top, it formed a kind of cross, into which iron rods with batteries were anchored. This double cross design was also burned into canvas. A live structure connected in this way probably singed the hair and could have caused bleeding wounds. A crown of thorns analogy, where the thorns are electrical discharges. Let's look down at the feet. The man's feet were not captured, but there is something that probably weighed the canvas down. Maybe weights. It appears to be something conductive as there are also signs of arcing. The hands of the crucified. Although Jesus's hands are known to have bled from the wound after the crucifixion, this man's hands were also bleeding, but due to the chain, the ends of which he held in his hands. He must have had a nasty gash on his wrist. It's not clear whether the man just wrapped himself in the chain, but metal attracts an electric arc very well. Based on the placement of the chain, it is likely that one of the more powerful blasts seriously injured his side. According to old texts, a centurion, i.e. a member of the Roman guard numbering 100 men, pierced his side. A cent equals 100. Could it be an equally large discharge on the order of 100 volts? Looking at the man's back, we see a series of injuries caused by electrical shocks and sparks. A little above the waist, however, we seem to be looking at a chain that is held in front of the body. Let's see what the whole scene could have looked like. Side view of a man standing, probably on an iron grate without insulation. Iron rods are attached to the grid for connecting the batteries. The structure is attached to the iron cross at the top and the whole forms a cage. The man has a chain wrapped around his body. In this way, an electric circuit is created, the connection of which creates an electric discharge. This discharge probably lasted several seconds or longer. However, in order to capture the image, it is necessary to use a mirror. I placed it on each side and marked it with an arrow. The canvas was draped over this iron structure and its edges were weighted to the floor. It's basically a very simplified SLR camera principle, albeit a very drastic one. But that wouldn't work without dark rooms. Some scientists claim that the outlines are painted with paint. Others claim that the cloth has Jesus's blood on it. Both are somewhat true. The canvas was probably soaked in some substance before used to enhance the image. This is similar to the photographic developers used to develop celluloid film. Blood on the canvas may be a true statement given the injury from an electric shock. Another thing is the mirror. The first mirrors began to be produced in Venice around the year 1300. And this fact would record the claim that the canvas originated in the Middle Ages. But what batteries were used? This battery measures 13.5 centimeters tall. So it is much smaller than the ones we see on the Shroud of Turin. Fruit juice was used as an electrolyte and the resulting voltage was 1 to 2.5 volts. So what was used as the electrolyte for such a strong discharge? But even a little tension can kill you. Let's look at a short example.
Hi there. After all the videos I made, there are some people out there that just don't get it and say it's the current that kills, not the voltage. To prove it to you once and for all, I'll be using my power supply here connected to these wires. This power supply can generate 20 volts, 150. Yes, it generates 20 volts and 150 amps. Let's short it in a more controlled manner. Well, you see when I short it, the voltage goes almost to... I was saying, when you short it together, the voltage you can see goes to 0 and the current goes to 150. It's hot! The power supply is set to 20 volts and I'm holding the wires with my fingers. I can't even weld with this power supply. Although this power supply can generate huge amounts of current, it can't send it through my body because it's only set to 20 volts. I can't even feel it on my fingers. I like to put it on my tongue, but before that, I have to reduce the voltage to something like 1 volt because you know, the resistance of the tongue is much smaller than the skin. And still, if I short the power supply, I get the same 150 amps. Okay, you can see it still sparks. Let's try it out. What the f? I thought I set it to 1 volt. Huge. Don't completely trust the gauges on your instruments and always double check them with a meter. Now, if I short the wires, I still get the same 150 amps. And it makes sparks, but the sparks are smaller because the voltage is smaller and therefore the total power is smaller. Let's put it on my tongue. See? Nothing. Let me explain. The simplest electrical formula is that voltage is equal to current times resistance. So if the voltage is 1 volt and if the resistance of my tongue is 10,000 ohms, then the current through my tongue will be only 0.1 milliamps. In order to create 1 amps through my tongue, I'll need 1 times 10,000 ohms or 10,000 volts across my tongue. See, the voltage is the energy required to create current. In order to get hurt, you need enough current. And to have enough current, you need high enough voltage. Anything that moves, including the electrons, started moving because some sort of energy has made it move. You will not have current without the voltage, at least in room temperatures. I don't know what kind of diabolical mumbo jumbo will happen at absolute zero. Saying that the voltage doesn't kill is like saying that the earthquake in the middle of the ocean doesn't kill. It's the tsunami afterwards that kills. With that analogy, if I shoot you, it's not my fault, it's the bullet's fault.
As you have seen, you can weld even from 20 volts. For example, if each of the 8 batteries had 2.5 volts, we get a total of 20 volts. However, this is affected by other factors such as exposure time. Another point of contention is the very material from which the canvas was made. There is a discrepancy in the dating of various parts. Some are said to be old, others from the Middle Ages. It is difficult to judge, but the fact remains that the canvas was of great value and property and was kept from generation to generation. Like today when we throw away our clothes. If such a canvas was damaged, a repair was carried out, during which the places damaged by the needle were rewoven. It is very laborious, but a skilled seamstress managed to fix the clothes in such a way that nothing was recognizable. And what else? Yes, we still forgot something. The Shroud of Turin is often attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, and I believe not wrongly. This multi-talented and mysterious man left us with many strange images and objects. There is a message hidden in each of them, such as in this painting called Salvatore Mundi, translated as Savior of the World. The very name Leonardo da Vinci means Golden Lion of Blessing. And you know what's interesting about this picture? Yes, I know. It's a crystal ball. Is it really crystal? Take a closer look. It is a ball of water and 3 glowing bodies inside. Like the Holy Trinity, or eternal light. There is a piece of this precious light in each of you. And faith in God and in a better world can therefore never be forgotten. Jesus' tomb in Jerusalem. Maybe Leonardo is back here. Could it be a darkroom? Look at the floor. Maybe there was a metal structure. What about the symbol on the wall? Doesn't it remind you of the diagram from the Shroud of Turin? Maybe Leonardo time traveled. Does that sound fantastic to you? But how can a person living in the Middle Ages paint an SLR camera with a flash in such detail? He can because he saw it. And note how the fly flies from the lightning like a human soul. God bless you all, and I look forward to seeing you again.